past 48 hours for Disney has been, well, folks, you know what we're going to say, dismal. And as is so often the case, not only was the court case in which Disney was attempting to wrestle back control of the local government that governs the Walt Disney World Resort, not only was that tossed out of court due to lack of standing, but also Disney had a significant asset, which is now valued at only $3 billion after it was purchased with the Fox deal in 2019, with an estimation far, far exceeding that. That was about a $10 billion, yes, folks, $10 billion loss for Disney yesterday. And they were dropped on Fortune's most appealing corporations list. So they were dropped down. Netflix now number one in the entertainment category there. And if you look at the court case and the fact that Disney now no longer has any claim other than appeals, which will not go anywhere. If you look at Disney's opportunities going forward with the legal system, you come away with the recognition that this political determination, this political speech they made in Florida, was a minimum $1 trillion loss for the company. And you never hear about $1 trillion losses for companies, and for good reason. But when it comes to Disney, what they did was they cost themselves the ability to govern themselves, which basically no corporation in the world has that ability. But they did. They had their own little Vatican City in Central Florida, and they decided to speak out about children's education issues regarding intimate things and when the official state curriculum would teach children about those. And parents didn't like that. Floridians didn't like that. And so they began to look at Disney. They put a little sunshine on what was going on and discovered that Disney had basically taken full control over the last 5 decades of a local government that controlled their theme park. When you add all the cost now of Disney now having to pay taxes, having to have all the normal regulations that they got to avoid in the past, when you look at the impact fees that Disney will have to pay, same as everybody else, and then you run the numbers and you say, well, Walt Disney World is probably going to exist for another 100 years minimum, maybe 150, maybe 200 years, whatever you want to say. We have no idea how that's going to play out, but it's going to be there for a very, 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 very long time. And then you take into account inflation, you arrive at a $1 trillion mistake. Now, that's a mistake that's bigger than the BP oil spill. The mainstream media is not talking about that very much. They're definitely not talking about it at that scale or that scope, but we know that's the truth. And we've been reporting on this accurately now for more than a year. So everybody just remember that all the pixie dusters and all of the mainstreamers out there who they said that Florida was too big and that, that Florida was too small and Disney was too big and that Florida didn't know what it was doing and all of this stuff. When they championed and cheerleaded for Disney and for Bob Iger to do this, when this was the means by which they tossed Bob Chapek out into his island resort and put Bob Iger back in the 2-shower power desk, well, that came with a $1 trillion price tag. And shareholders, especially given this earnings report that's coming up, shareholders should be livid that political speech that had absolutely nothing to do with the company's fortunes or future, that political speech, which is acknowledged now by Disney as having been explicitly political, not having anything, not one iota of intent towards making money, that political speech, that arbitrary political interference into Floridians' lives cost shareholders $1 trillion over however long Disney World exists. It is a huge story. And this appeal that Disney has done is just to try to delay, because there is no way that they're going to win. For Disney to win their appeal, which will go to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, for Disney to win that appeal, Disney doesn't have to prove that something was done to them that was wrong. That they didn't even make it that far. Disney has to prove that they're a valid plaintiff. In other words, Disney's court case that was much ballyhooed by the media was thrown out because they don't have standing, because they were not a party to any grievance that happened, because this was a dissolution of a local government. Disney isn't a local government, no matter how much they thought they were. And so a dissolution of a local government by the presiding government that's above them, the state government, has nothing to do with Disney, other than the fact that Disney is one of the residents within that, one of the property owners within that, one of the impacted entities within that local government. They're not the only one. And so it was tossed out because there's no standing. So for Disney to win the appeal, they would actually have to transform what standing means in the legal enterprise of North America. And that is not going to happen. That's just, there's no way in the world that a majority of justices, a majority of judges are going to listen to that and say, yes, we would like to upend the meaning of standing for the entire legal system and be slapped down in a week by the Supreme Court so that we can appease the mouse. There's no way that is going to happen. Ultimately, Disney's plan, I believe, and this is what Andrew said on the channel this morning, ultimately Disney's plan is to try to just get some more time. And why? Why do they need more time? Why is it worth it to put these frivolous appeals up? Well, because Nelson Peltz is waging a proxy war. And if this was the end of it, Bob Iger would have to admit utter defeat in the upcoming earnings report and then the ballot come April. So they're not going to do that. They're going to continue to pretend that they're fighting when in fact, the fighting is no more and the $1 trillion price tag is here for the mouse to stay.
Well, the other issue is that a shareholder could sue Disney for abandoning its fiduciary duties by being wanton and reckless with regards to something that has nothing to do with its core business.
And I think, Paul, that's on the way. I'm not here to give, because we don't want to stray into financial advice where I'm telling you what's going to happen to the company and what you should do with your shares, your stocks, what have you. But I can't imagine a future where there's not lawsuits happening.
Well, I'm just saying that is fairly common. Even
Right.
Apple got sued by one of its shareholders, big shareholders, for giving too much money to charity. And this happens all the time. And, people are litigious, even at the worst of times. But this is,
well, yes, but
completely ridiculous.
But at least those shareholders have standing, Paul.
Yeah, and this has been a very public fight, right? And Disney picked the fight. That's the problem.
Right. And the board is going to be...
And now they're crying cry bully.
Yeah. Well, and look, the person that was leading the charge wasn't even leading the company at the time, which was Bob Iger. Look, the company never would have been put in this position where they were working against their investors' best interests had, Iger not, put in place all these ridiculous notions of reimagine tomorrow and all this DIE stuff and everything else. Had he not been actively from the sideline yelling and being a cheerleader for opposing this, which he was. Going back into March of, 2022, he was really working against Chapek and, probably the best person that they could have had in the position at the time, their PR guy who, was well respected and giving solid advice, which is to stay out of this.
Right. They didn't. This was a shadow campaign to remove Bob Chapek because Bob Chapek, as Culture was saying, was moderating the company. And that had to be stopped. And in fact, this entire kerfuffle in Florida all broke loose weeks before Bob Chapek was set to change official corporate policy at the company to get away from attacking fans and to get away from creating divisive content. The official policy was set to come out in a few weeks. And that's when this all blew up. And I think it's because that policy was going to be board enforced. It was going to be board supported. And the Igerites needed to shift that rapidly.
Oh, yeah. And it much to the detriment of the company overall. Obviously, you spoke to the financial or, situation as far as the taxes and everything else and the ability to mitigate any expense on the corporate bottom line on the spreadsheets to tell everybody what you're making. But the damage is far worse than that. The opinion of Disney has dropped substantially, and the opinion of Wall Street has dropped substantially, hasn't it, bro?
Well, isn't it amazing, Culture, that you've got a company which is now being penalized by its own stupidity? This is a cell phone. The company's being penalized by its own stupidity, $1 trillion minimum. There's no telling it. You get into what kind of, the number can't be accurately ascertained because we don't know how long the theme park will exist, the theme park resort. But it's going to exist a really, really, really long time. Even if it is, bought by someone else, it's still going to be paying these penalties. And I say penalty in the sense of it's going to be paying its fair share that every other company pays that it was exempt from, and a tremendous number of ways, because this was really a unique situation. Just how many perks and benefits and special exemptions this place had. So, isn't it amazing that you have this amount of money, which dwarfs the cost of the BP oil spill from the biggest entertainment company in the world, and the media is not covering it that way? And at the same time, we also have, within the same 24, 48 hours, you have this announcement about the business that Disney was doing in India, which was valued at something like, what, $15 billion back in 2019?
Yeah, well, yeah, back then, yeah, they managed to knock that value down.
Right now, it's valued at $3.5 billion, easily in excess of a $10 billion loss in a valuation of a major asset, which they're now selling.
Yeah.
So you've got a $10 billion loss there. I mean, this is just unsustainable. And so I don't know what they're going to do, with Bob Iger. I don't know what they're going to do with the board. You can't have, in one 24-hour to 48-hour period, a $1 trillion hit and a $10 billion hit. I mean, I don't know how to put these numbers in perspective, because they're just so huge. And one 100th of this would sink a normal company.
Well, and they're not being portrayed that way in the news media. That's something that you've said multiple times. But it's so funny to me that all the same players are playing in this same game, because you mentioned the BP oil spill. Well, who was the guy that was the front man for that? Jeff Morrell. He was the front man for Disney that resigned because Chapek and Iger and anybody else wasn't listening to him.
Think about that culture. Yeah. They brought in Jeff Morrell to clean up an already BP level problem at Disney, and they fired him and made one that's 10 times bigger.
It was ridiculous. And I think we're softballing the amount of money that Disney's lost in India. I think we are. I think it's probably closer to 12 billion that they've lost in valuation of their India holdings.
There's going to be a day where we're like, and Disney's lost another $7 trillion out of sheer stupidity, folks. I mean, because these numbers boggle the mind.
But the problem is too, Pro, and I'm not sure if anybody else here would agree, you're dealing with the fact that Disney's building their house of cards on sand. I mean, it's worse than building it on no foundation at all.
Water would be more appropriate.
Yeah, exactly. And that seems to be the norm for them now. This India deal was built on all of these other things perfectly aligning and not screwing up at all. And then you have Z Media do what they did with Sony. Well, Sony probably looked at that, and I mentioned this in a video that never got released to the public with Jonas, unfortunately, because the story got bigger, and that's just what happens with these things. Every single story we report on gets it bigger. But anyway, Sony looks at this deal with Z and goes, "You haven't performed. It's been 2 years. You haven't performed. We're walking away. You owe us $50 million, which you don't have." Right. So Sony walks away from that, probably in part because they don't want to partner up with Disney in any other way than they have to right now with the Marvel Spider-Man thing. But they're like, you know what? Disney's not doing well. We don't need this. And this deal is not going to happen. Therefore, Z can't perform on the deal that they have with Disney over cricket rights. So that gets sideways. And because they no longer have access to these cricket rights, the deal with Reliance in India, to have them acquire 60% in a merger of non-equals in this situation, as Jonas is fond of saying, you end up with Disney losing so much valuation that, as you mentioned, it's worth about 3.4 billion. What they have in India, from 16 billion, 15.5 billion to 3.4, 3.6 billion.
So you tell me what kind of a businessman Bob Iger has turned out to be in his late 60s, early 70s.
A weatherman.
This is a man. This is a man who decided to insert the company into determining when and how 4-year-olds would be taught about gender issues.
Yeah.
And as a result, cost his company $1 trillion. And this is a man who, with this Fox deal, which, I have not seen any significant return on the Fox deal that is suffice for what they paid. But not only is that a bad deal in and of itself, at the same time, this is a man who bought these rights that you're talking about for India, for media in India, bought it with an evaluation at 16 billion, and now it's worth 3.5. What kind of a man is this that has that kind of a terrible track record in the last few years? He is horrendous. As good as, think about this too, okay? Think about Feige out of Marvel. Think about the run that he had, and now think about the fact that he's now presided over perhaps the largest flop in the history of cinema with the Marvels. It's like something has happened to these guys at the top, and the girls too. How do you go from what Feige had with the Midas touch to that situation? How do you go with Bob Iger being the guy who buys Pixar, the guy who continues this Disney renaissance into great success, and now he's this guy?
Hold on.
Yes.
You're assuming that there won't be a bigger failure than the Marvels.
Well,
I really object to the way you've characterized
Wow.
the Marvels. There could be a bigger one later.
Captain America.
Captain America, I was just about to say.
Yeah.
Given the money that goes into reshooting Act 1, 2, and 3 of that.
I just want to be accurate on this show because Andre demands this kind of analysis from me.
Yeah.
This is true.
That's why you're here, Paul.
Well,
That and the nude pictures.
all I can say is we are here right now because Bob Iger thinks his perception of right and wrong is more important than what parents think is right and wrong in the state of Florida.
He's paid to be right and wrong, isn't he? Or he's paid to be right.
I think it's out of control. I think, again, one of the things that I've noticed in modern businesses is how the staff have seemed to have taken over and are doing their own stuff, just like the at the AMC theaters where they were turning off the air conditioning. Anyone who went to see Sound of Freedom, that wasn't management, that was staff that decided to take things over. There's I've mentioned before the staff at a book publisher here in Toronto who the staff were objected to Peterson's latest book that's actually going to pay their salary. The companies have no longer know how to control their employees. And this is, I think, Disney, a lot of stuff that's happening at Disney isn't even managed by generated by the managers. It's generated by the staff that are doing ad hoc things, just like the disclaimer that I made fun of for the Aristocats video, although that disclaimer is common. But again, someone decided that 2 seconds of cats with chopsticks in their paws was somehow offensive to children and needed this massive gobbledygook disclaimer.
Inclusion through exclusion. Can't have chopsticks.
Nope. Cats can't have chopsticks. That is cultural
appropriation. Paul, don't you dare use a chopstick. Don't you dare eat sushi, sir.
I have to place blame where it belongs. Thanks, Canada, for these kind of notions. We appreciate it.
I'm going to blame the academies. This is what we saw coming, and not the Entertainment Academy. I'm talking about the Ivy Leagues. This is what we watched the last decade, and we all said, "Oh no, wait till these people get in the workforce." And here they are, and they're doing the same thing that they did on the college campuses, except it's with the corporations, and the corporations didn't stop it, and they deserve what they're going through right now. And what is that? Well, if you look at Disney, if you want to know the practical impact we've seen so far, Disney was in the running to be up there with Netflix 4 years ago. We pondered whether or not they could overtake Netflix. There were guidances that they had a chance. Now it's Netflix. Well, at first it's YouTube, then it's Netflix, then it's Amazon, and then way, 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 way down is Disney. And there's now questions about whether Disney should just give up and throw ESPN in with Netflix. That's the suggestion by Nelson Peltz. And Disney is a shadow of its former self.
Oh, no question.
Sorry,
Culture,
no, go ahead. Go, please. No,
I was just going to say that I just looked at my stats. 40% of my audience is watching YouTube on a television, not on a device.
Yes. Well, as we pointed out,
I was many times stunned.
Over.
You got to work on your graphics now.
Since the beginning of the whole streaming war, that YouTube was being overlooked. YouTube was the one that actually has the most viewers.
40% watching it on a TV, though. I mean,
but to go back to
I have to give Google credit because the interface for watching YouTube videos on the big screen on their little Google Chrome device is probably the best of all the streamers.
Think how good you look on an 80-inch OLED. Think of the makeup you need to start using now that you know.
That's the size I need minimum to keep my ego in check.
Well, let me introduce this other idea when it comes to.
Well, before you do that, I just wanted to respond to Paul's. I've been trying to say this for the last 5 minutes. The answer is already out there, like we've been saying for a while. Yes, you are right, Paul. A lot of this comes from the quote unquote creative level, And that's what we're learning, or at least being confirmed now with film threats reporting, stuff that we've been saying for years, that these people that are in there, they're the ones that are doing this. And it's a group of people that are basically buying into this political Marxism or whatever you want to call it. They're the same people that got Gina Carano booted. They're the problem, right? And it's people like Bob Iger who are allowing this shit to continue. But anyway,
they're enabling it because they're pulling in an old tactic, which is that if enough employees are in lockstep with a certain agenda or a certain ideology, they can actually walk out and leave the company crippled for a temporary time, because the company would have to then rehire and retrain all those people. And what happens when you have bad management? They don't take the risk into the rehire and retrain. They're like, well, we'll just keep these people on longer so that we don't have to worry about that extra expense.
Which is what I think exactly what happened during the Florida incident, because otherwise, any other time in history, those people would have just been shit canned.
Yeah,
right.
And they should have been. I mean, and look, back to the most important thing that Pro brought up when it comes to YouTube and how important it is in regards to streaming. Yesterday or day before yesterday, it was announced formally that that YouTube had actually crossed the 100 million mark in paid premium subscribers to YouTube.
Wow.
Just
really?
the premium level, not YouTube TV, but just premium subscribers, so they don't get ads.
Right.
Consider that when you consider that, you know, YouTube's on the warpath against ad blockers. They are desperate for that money, but at the same time, they're collecting a giant pile of money.
100 million subscribers.
100 million subscribers to YouTube Premium.
YouTube Premium is pretty good.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, if you want to know where this goes in terms of success versus anti-success, which it's not failure, it's anti-success. You have groups which are actively attempting to sabotage success.
Yeah.
If Disney doesn't get their head wrapped around this, and if these other companies don't, then you end up with these rock steady situations where you have activists coming in as third parties and quote unquote consulting, so that you have the Flash, not Yellow Flash, but literally the character, the Flash, being urinated upon, his corpse, and you have Batman being, shot in the head and all this. This is where, that's the ultimate end when you run this thing out to its finality, and it's utter, it's what would you say? It's depravity, but it's stupid, pointless depravity. In it's the ultimate grift.
Well, it's
And
like a
that's what these
cultural
people want.
vandalism.
It's
Sorry,
a shock.
what'd you say?
It's a shock jock attempt. It's basically, let's do something shocking to get people talking about it, generate interest, generate money, et cetera, et cetera. The difference being, at least in the traditional side of the shock jock, is that there's actually something to say a little bit beyond that point. It wasn't just a gimmick. Sometimes the ideas would hit or resonate, or there'd be some sort of level of articulation that would get people to be interested. People that hate it want to listen to what happens, and people that love it want to listen to because they like the points of view being espoused. But when you have something in regards to activists coming in here to do something edgy and shocking, they're doing it really for the flash in the pan approach, not seeing the fact that it's not going to actually facilitate growth within the company. I mean, listen, if you're going to create a game called the Suicide Squad Kills the Justice League, you better kill the Justice League. How you kill them is fine. But the thing is, that you kill them is fine. It's how you go about doing it. What's the most creative way? What's authentic to the characters? What's more dramatic? What gets an emotional response out of people? I think some emotional responses are very justified, but I've been hearing more commentary that the gameplay and the microtransactions or things of similar force are what's really plaguing the system. And then you have the other aspect is that the story is really bland as well.
Right. It's not only depraved. It's not only an inversion of basic morality.
Well, it means
It
about
also-
villains. It's supposed to be an inversion of basic morality. Don't sidestep it and say that villains have to be good. That's a bad message to promote, because that's exactly what some of these activists are trying to do.
Well, what I would say is that Harley Quinn has always been presented as a sort of a victim anti-hero. So she's victimized by the Joker, and then she exists as sort of this anti-hero where she makes the good decision on at times. But I think she's presented in such a way here where she is, there's things that she does in the game that we really can't even talk about on YouTube. She intimately assaults one of the heroes who's tied up. You've got the urination on a character's corpse. I mean, these things go a little far, and I think they desecrate the symbolism of Harley Quinn. Right? I think it actually damages that character you also have that very bizarre thing going on with a childlike poison ivy and an attraction there. That just very strange things. And so what I think is that there's definitely a way to have a villain take the lead role and to do villainous things. But if you're going to do that, if Batman's last words before he dies are we done with the bad stand-up routine? Like that's fifth grade level writing.
Yes.
So there's no gravitas to it. And then at the same time, you're damaging the brand overall. But that's all I have to say about that.
Well, again, look, just anytime you're looking at a game, a AAA title or better, because I know people consider there are 5A titles out there regardless. Anyway, you're looking at a AAA title or better. Look for the words Sweet Baby Inc. And then if it appears, walk away.
Yeah. Well, was there any more on the Disney front that we had to touch on?
Sure, there's one big part. So the question being is, when is the appeal scheduled to be heard in court? And then how close is that to IATSE's negotiations? Because Disney's being rumored as the one holdout because they've lost so much money over the last year that they don't want to play ball with IATSE, which means it could facilitate another strike, which means Nelson Peltz, if he's smart, could try and use that to weaponize himself to get back into the board positions to select members on the seat. Select members to be seated.
So Disney wants to ruin the industry some more by initiating another strike. Oh, fantastic.
So
yeah, right now I know that Paramount and Warner Brothers are all game for playing ball. It's a little up in the air on Universal side of things, and Sony hasn't made any comments as far as I've heard.
Wow.
So my understanding is that they do not yet have they don't have a date yet.
It's not been filed.
Well, I'm looking to see if it has been filed technically yet, or if Disney's just said they were going to file. I think they filed it yesterday.
Really? I didn't see anything.
I think they did. I think they filed it yesterday, but I don't think there's been a court response yet. So I don't know that there's a timeline yet as to when they might get a decision. That said, the chance of this succeeding is absolutely minuscule.
Oh, you are correct. They did. They
would have to have a panel of judges in the majority decide that Disney had standing, and that would require rewriting the meaning of standing. So that would be slapped down by the U.S. Supreme Court very fast. So that it would be a watershed kind of decision. I can't imagine this being successful. For Disney, though, I think their goal is to muck this up until at least past April. They need to get through these ballot votes, still being able to say we're in current, legal action against DeSantis and Siftad and all of that.
This clip was taken from Midnight's Edge in the Morning, which streams live every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 9 a.m. Pacific Time on the Midnight's Edge main channel. There, you can send in your live questions and comments before clips and full stream replays are uploaded to Midnight's Edge live archives. We are also on Twitter, Rumble, Odyssey, and Facebook, so smash that like, help share, subscribe, and join us.